I had exactly $842,600 missing from a family preservation trust, a fresh incision under my ribcage from surgery that still pulled when I stood up too fast, and a padded envelope on my kitchen counter that had arrived without a return address 2 hours before my younger sister called to remind me that I was no longer welcome at our father's memorial gala. She said it lightly, almost kindly, like she was doing me a favor. Inside the envelope was a black USB drive with a strip of blue painter's tape on it and one word written in neat block letters. Look. I dropped the cap from my pain medication and had to get down on one knee to find it. That was the kind of week I was having. By sunrise, a probate judge would sign an emergency order that would freeze accounts my sister thought she had already buried 3 states deep. Let me take you back. My father died on a Tuesday in late September, the kind of humid savanna day where the air feels like it's holding its breath. Officially, it was a cardiac event at 68. Unofficially, grief had been working on him for years after my mother died, and then the city did what cities do to men with old buildings and big ideals. It took from him slowly. He spent 40 years restoring historic properties, one brick and one permit fight at a time. He wasn't rich in the loud way. He was rich in files, land maps, relationships, and promises people trusted because he kept them. 3 weeks after the funeral, while I was still sleeping upright because of his surgery, my sister Vanessa began speaking in the slow, patient tone people use when they want to make theft sound administrative. "Elena," she said over speaker while I stood in my kitchen with one hand on the counter. "Dad made me acting manager. We need to simplify things." "We?" I said. "Or you?" There was a pause. Then her fiancé, Grant, came on the line without announcing himself. That was his style. He liked to arrive already standing in the doorway. "If you miss this," he said, "you lose everything." He meant the Thursday probate review. He meant the donor board's confirmation meeting. He meant the lock on the old Mercer house, the flagship property my father had spent 17 years restoring into a museum and scholarship venue. He meant they were moving faster than I was healing. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. The history between Vanessa and me had always sounded smaller in family retellings than it felt in real life. She was 6 years younger, prettier in the effortless way that made people project innocence onto her, and better at smiling through lies. I was the useful daughter. She was the adored one. When I was 15, Dad took both of us to one of his restoration sites after school. I remember the smell of sawdust and wet plaster. I had spent the entire summer helping him catalog window hardware, learning the difference between original brass and reproduction fittings. Vanessa wandered in an hour late carrying a Cherry IC and a disposable camera. Dad looked up and laughed like the sun had walked in. "There's my star," he said. I was standing 3 feet away holding a ledger with copper stains on my fingers. The second incident was quieter. Maybe that's why it stayed with me longer. I was 28, already managing one of Dad's renovation projects, and I found Vanessa had charged $12,000 in client hospitality to a property LLC that didn't even have active guests. I brought the receipts to my father. He stared at them, then at me, and said, "Elena, not everyone is built like you. Some people need a softer landing." She stole from the company. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and answered in the calmest voice imaginable. "You always make things sound so ugly." That was our family gift. We could turn theft into stress, manipulation into charm, and neglect into personality. Vanessa learned early that consequences arrived slower for her. I learned they arrived faster for me. After my mother died, the imbalance got worse. Vanessa became fragile in everyone's imagination. I became durable. Durable daughters get asked to absorb more. The surgery happened in August, 6 weeks before Dad died. It was supposed to be routine. Gallbladder complications, laparoscopic, home in a day. Instead, there was an infection, then a second hospital stay, then a fatigue so deep I would forget why I had opened a drawer. During that stretch, Vanessa and Grant helped my father with accounts, donor outreach, and trust paperwork. That was the word everyone kept using. Helped. By the time I could stand without bracing against furniture, there were new locks on the office at Mercer House, new signatory cards on 2 operating accounts, and a polished statement from Vanessa explaining that Dad had wanted a fresh structure before he passed. The padded envelope arrived on a rainy Monday. No note, just the drive. I plugged it into an old laptop I used for scanning receipts. There were 2 folders. The first was labeled GALA. The second was labeled Read Last. I opened the first folder anyway. Inside were venue contracts, donor guest lists, and a draft run of show for the Memorial Gala Vanessa was hosting that Friday night at the Beaufort Room inside the old Ashcroft Hotel. She had rebranded it from a memorial fundraiser into an evening for legacy, which sounded expensive and bloodless. My father's scholarship was still on the materials, but his name had been pushed below 3 sponsor logos and Vanessa's new nonprofit entity, the Mercer Cultural Futures Foundation. I had never heard of it. Attached in the folder was the certificate of incorporation for the nonprofit, filed 9 days after my father died. Vanessa as president, Grant as treasurer, mailing address, the office suite above Grant's boutique advisory firm. My incision burned. Then I opened Read Last. That folder held scanned bank statements, a trust amendment, wire instructions, a PDF titled Membership Interests, and an audio file. The trust amendment was the first thing that made me sit down. My father had created an irrevocable trust 10 years earlier to preserve Mercer House and fund a scholarship for trade apprentices who wanted to learn restoration work. The amendment Vanessa had been waving around for 2 weeks gave her broad management authority after his death. But this copy had 2 versions side by side. One bore my father's usual signature. The other bore a signature that looked correct until I zoomed in and saw the hesitation marks. The second version shifted a fraud carve-out clause from 2 lines at the bottom into an omitted page. I read it 3 times. Any beneficiary or acting manager found to have diverted trust assets for personal use, concealed material transfers, or induced execution by misrepresentation would forfeit all beneficial interest immediately. My father had put a trapdoor in his own documents. A canary clause. That was what my law school roommate used to call it when a clause was designed to reveal who had tampered with a document by seeing what disappeared in the final version. I played the audio file next. It was my father's voice, weaker than I remembered, but steady. If Vanessa ever tries to move the scholarship money outside the trust, Elena will know why this language is here. I am not disinheriting my younger daughter. I am documenting a boundary. There is a difference. I stopped the recording and stared at the wall. The second folder changed everything. I called the only person I trusted who hated theatrics more than I did. Nora Bell, probate litigator, 52. Precise. The kind of woman who never raised her voice because it would have suggested she had lost control of something. She answered on the second ring. "Are you sitting down?" I asked. "I am now." I emailed everything while she stayed on the line. I could hear pages turning on her end, keyboard clicks, then silence. Finally she said, "Who sent this?" "I don't know. The signature page on the amendment is suspicious. The missing carve-out is not suspicious. It's targeted, so they knew exactly what to remove." Yes. I told her about the gala, the new nonprofit, the donor board, the deadline. Nora said, "Do not go to the board first. Do not call Vanessa. Do not send a threatening text. Bring me every original document you have from your father's files." This afternoon, I closed the laptop. "This isn't revenge," I said, mostly to myself. Nora answered, "Good. Because revenge is messy. This is justice." At 2 o'clock, I drove to her office with a canvas file bag my father had used for permit applications. I moved slowly because every bump in the road still tugged at the healing muscle near my ribs. Nora met me in the lobby without makeup and without small talk. In her conference room, we spread documents across a walnut table until it looked like an evidence wall flattened by exhaustion. She explained each term because she knew panic makes smart people stupid. "A forensic audit," she said, tapping the bank statements, "will trace where the trust funds actually went." She slid over the LLC paperwork. This is an LLC shell, not illegal by itself. But when scholarship money moves into it, and then into a management company controlled by the same 2 people, we start seeing intent. She circled the notarized signature block on the trust amendment. If the notary log doesn't match the date, or if the signature was pasted from a prior instrument, that matters. Then she looked at the membership certificate. "Your father retained the sole Class B voting interest in Mercer House Holdings. Vanessa's foundation only gets usage rights if the trust remains intact. She cannot donate, encumber, or transfer title without probate approval. If she represented otherwise to donors or the board, that is material misrepresentation." I understood maybe 80% in the moment. The other 20 arrived later, like bruising. "What can we do today?" We can seek a temporary restraining order, an emergency asset freeze, and expedited discovery before the gala. Before Friday, if the judge sees what I see. That was the first crack of oxygen I'd had in days. The ally twist arrived an hour later in loafers and a charcoal raincoat. Marlene Price, my father's longtime executive assistant, stepped into Nora's conference room carrying a banker's box and the expression of someone who had been insulted once too often and finally decided to become useful. Vanessa had fired her that morning by courier. Not a call, not even a meeting. A courier. She told me I was becoming forgetful, Marlene said. I'm 64, not dead. She set the box down and removed a manila envelope from the top. I'm the one who mailed the drive. I looked at her and felt, for the first time since Dad died, something steadier than anger. Why not tell me? Because I needed to know whether your emails were being monitored, and because Grant has the manners of a smiling burglar. Inside Marlene's box were donor pledge cards, a printed notary log from a UPS store in Bluffton, and copies of wire confirmations she had been told to shred. She hadn't shredded them. She had scanned them and kept the originals in a recipes binder labeled holiday sides. Nora let out one short breath that might have been admiration. Marlene also had the piece I didn't know we needed. She had preserved the metadata from the edited trust PDF. The file properties showed it had been created on Grant's office computer at 11:42 p.m., 2 days after the date listed on the amendment. Last edited by G. Weller Advisory. Evidence twist. Clean. Quiet. Fatal. Can metadata get laughed out of court? I asked. No, Nora said. Not when it's authenticated. By Thursday morning, we had filed for emergency relief in Chatham County Probate Court. Nora submitted an affidavit from Marlene, the audio file, the parallel amendments, the wire trail, and the metadata report from a digital forensics consultant she bullied into working overnight. I was there when she handed up the binder. A judge in rimless glasses read in complete silence for 14 minutes that felt longer than my marriage. Vanessa and Grant didn't know yet. The hearing on emergency relief was set for Friday at 4:30. The gala began at 7. That should have been enough. Legally, maybe it was. But people like Vanessa survive on social timing. They count on public impressions solidifying before facts can catch up. If she secured the board and the donors at that gala, if photos went out, if pledges were announced, if she performed certainty in a room full of wealthy people who preferred smooth stories, the case would get harder in all the ways that never show up in law books. I wanted the order. I also wanted the truth to reach the room she had built. Friday afternoon, a coastal storm rolled in earlier than forecast. Thick gray clouds over Savannah, palms bending, low thunder pressing against the city like a second pulse. At 3:20 p.m., the Ashcroft Hotel lost partial power. Not a full outage, just enough to knock out half the ballroom lighting and their audiovisual system. Venue switch. Vanessa sent a mass text at 3:46 p.m. moving the gala to Mercer House itself. My father's house. The museum. The place she had effectively barred me from entering. When the text came through, Nora was reviewing the proposed restraining order with me in the courthouse corridor. I showed her the screen. She smiled for the first time all week. It was not a warm smile. She just moved the crime scene back to the asset. At 4:37 p.m., the judge signed a temporary restraining order preventing any transfer, encumbrance, pledge-based collateralization, or managerial restructuring involving trust assets, Mercer House holdings, or scholarship funds pending an evidentiary hearing. He also approved an immediate asset freeze on 2 named accounts and ordered preservation of all electronic communications. The courtroom went silent. That's not a phrase I would have used before that day, but it's the only one that fits. Vanessa's lawyer, who had arrived 20 minutes late smelling faintly of airport cologne, actually stopped shuffling his papers. Grant looked like a man realizing his confidence had been financed on margin. They asked for a continuance. Denied. They argued Vanessa was merely honoring her father's wishes. The judge looked at the metadata report and said, "Then she may explain why her fiancé's office created the governing amendment after the date on which it was supposedly executed." Silence again. Nora asked for immediate service at the gala location. Granted. We drove straight to Mercer House in the storm. The old place glowed through rain like a ship someone had anchored in the wrong century. Valets in black coats were hustling guests under umbrellas. Donors stepped carefully around puddles in polished shoes. A string quartet had been relocated to the front parlor because the ballroom acoustics were a mess without the hotel setup. Through the windows, I could see Vanessa moving through the crowd in a black dress with a narrow gold belt, touching elbows, accepting condolences she hadn't earned. I felt the old family instinct then, the one that says keep it private, keep it graceful, don't embarrass anyone. It passed. Inside, the room smelled like lilies and wet wool. Grant was near the bar telling one of the board members that the venue change had been intimate by design. He saw me first. His face barely moved, but his shoulders did. "Elena," he said, too smooth. "This isn't really the moment." "No," I said. "It's the receipt." Vanessa turned then, and for one impossible second she looked relieved to see me, as if some primitive part of her still thought I was here to help her carry the thing she had dropped. Then she saw Nora, then the deputy behind us with the service packet. "What is this?" she asked. Nora stepped forward. "A signed restraining order, notice of asset freeze, and preservation demand. You've been served." Several guests pretended not to notice with the exquisite failure only rich people manage in public. Vanessa's smile held for almost 3 seconds after the words registered. Then it broke in tiny increments. "This is grotesque," she said softly. "At our father's event." "Your event," I said. "You changed the title." Grant reached for the packet. The deputy handed it to him and said, "Sir, do not interfere." That was the small reveal. The bigger one came when Marlene walked in from the side hall carrying a slim silver laptop and a portable projector. She had told me she wanted to stay away from the circus. Apparently, she had changed her mind. Vanessa actually laughed when she saw her. "Marlene," she said, "you don't work here." Marlene set the projector on a side table beneath my father's portrait. "No," she said, "but I remember where the outlets are." The room had gone thin and quiet. Board members stopped speaking. The quartet faltered and fell still. Nora did not grandstand. She simply asked Marlene, loudly enough for those nearest to hear, "Would you please identify the file creation records for Exhibit C?" Marlene connected the laptop. On the wall appeared a screenshot of the trust amendment properties. Timestamp visible, user field visible, edit path visible. Grant stepped forward. "This is completely improper," Nora replied. "You're welcome to explain why your office computer generated the amendment that removed the fraud carve-out." That phrase carried. Fraud carve-out. People heard it and immediately began translating it into donor language. Risk, liability, association. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Dad wanted me in charge. Everyone knew that." I said, "Then why alter the document?" "I didn't." Marlene opened the next file. Wire transfers. Scholarship funds to Mercer Cultural Futures Foundation. Then management fees to Weller Advisory. Then a deposit to a title company in Charleston. "What is that?" asked one of the board members, a retired judge named Calvin Rhodes. Nora answered before Vanessa could. "It appears to be escrow on a condominium purchase." Grant's face changed then. It was small, but final. A man's private contempt stepping into public view. Vanessa turned to him. "Tell them." He said nothing. That was the bigger reveal. The nuclear one arrived from a direction I had not expected. My father had selected the scholarship board years earlier, and among the guests was Reverend June Holloway, pastor of the church my parents attended before my mother got sick. I had always known her as gentle. I had never known her as dangerous. She stepped forward from the second row of guests holding a cream envelope. "Before his death," she said, "Arthur Mercer gave me instructions in the event of a dispute over legacy assets." She handed the envelope to Nora. Inside was a sealed letter from my father to the board, dated 6 months earlier. In it he described concerns about Vanessa's spending, his fear that Grant viewed Mercer House as a prestige vehicle, and his decision to place an additional codicil with a neutral custodian. Attached was a signed memorandum naming me successor trustee if any manager or beneficiary triggered the carve-out through concealment or diversion of assets. I had not known the letter existed. Neither had Vanessa. Dramatic irony is a cold thing when you're living it. There I was, the daughter everyone called rigid, discovering in real time that my father had finally understood exactly what my caution had been trying to warn him about for years. Vanessa read the first page over Nora's shoulder and said, very quietly, "He wouldn't have done this." Reverend Holloway looked at her with genuine sadness. "He did," she said. "He asked me to hold it because he feared you would charm anyone else." No one moved. Rain struck the windows in hard diagonal lines. Somewhere in the back hall, a serving tray tipped and glasses clinked against tile. Grant made the mistake people like him always make when the room stops granting them reality. He tried to seize it back with force of tone. "This is a family matter being weaponized," he said. "There is no crime here. At worst, this is a bookkeeping dispute." Nora turned toward the board. "A bookkeeping dispute does not require a forged amendment, concealed transfers, false nonprofit representations, or an attempt to collateralize trust assets during probate." Then she looked at the deputy. "Please ensure the respondents do not remove any records from the premises." Vanessa stared at me, not crying, not pleading, just staring with the old disbelief of a favorite child encountering a locked door for the first time. "You did this at Dad's memorial." I answered truthfully. "No, you did." The board chair cleared his throat and announced that all donor pledges were suspended pending review. The scholarship gala was terminated. Mercer House would remain closed until the court appointed temporary oversight. Guests began leaving in the careful silence of people who understood they were witnessing a social death and wanted to avoid stepping in it. As they filed past, I heard snippets. Metadata, escrow. Good Lord, you donated already? One woman asked if her check had cleared. Another asked whether the foundation even had tax-exempt status yet. That one hurt Vanessa more than anything else. You could see it. She had not just wanted money. She had wanted legitimacy. By 9:30, the house was empty except for me, Nora, Marlene, the deputy, and a forensic accountant's assistant photographing file cabinets. The string quartet had long since packed up. Rainwater tracked across the entry tile. My father's portrait hung above all of us with that half-amused expression he wore when he thought people were being foolish but redeemable. Vanessa stood in the library while Grant argued in a whisper near the front hall with his attorney over speakerphone. I did not go to her. She came to me. "He always forgave me," she said. It was not an apology. It was an accusation. I looked at the desk where my father used to sort tenant ledgers by hand. Maybe that was the problem. She inhaled sharply, as if I had slapped her. Then she said the calmest cruel thing she'd said to me in years. "You always needed paperwork to feel loved." I let that sit between us. Then I answered, "No, I needed paperwork because I was the only one in this family paying attention." She turned away first. The official consequences took months, because real justice usually does. The emergency order held. Discovery began. The forensic audit traced $842,600 in diverted funds through the nonprofit and 2 related entities. The notary whose stamp appeared on the altered amendment signed an affidavit stating she had never witnessed my father execute that document on the listed date. A handwriting expert found evidence of composite signature transfer. Grant's office server preserved an email thread that should have been deleted, one in which he wrote, "We only need the clean version for 90 days. After donor night, no one will care." People cared. The civil case became easier after that. The criminal referral followed. There was a deposition where Vanessa tried to claim she believed the transfers were temporary bridge loans for programming costs until Nora walked her through each ledger entry and asked why programming costs included Italian plumbing fixtures for a Charleston condo. There was another hearing where Grant's counsel argued the escrow had been personal and unrelated until the title company produced a payment memo listing Mercer Cultural Futures as the source of funds. And then there was the probate evidentiary hearing in January. Cold morning, gray sky, wood-paneled courtroom. My ribs had healed by then, but I still touched the scar when I was nervous. Old habits. Nora presented the trust, the codicil, the canary clause, the metadata, the audit, the affidavit, the server records, and Reverend Holloway's letter. She did it without flair, one clean line at a time. Vanessa took the stand and tried to cry. Some juries forgive that. Probate judges rarely do. When asked why she failed to disclose the transfers to the board, she said she had been overwhelmed by grief. When asked why the nonprofit's mailing address matched Grant's office, she said it was administrative convenience. When asked why the altered amendment omitted the fraud carve-out, she said she had never seen that page. Nora placed the audio recorder on counsel table and played my father's voice into the room. If Vanessa ever tries to move the scholarship money outside the trust, Elena will know why this language is here. The courtroom went silent. This time, even Vanessa did. The judge removed her as acting manager. enforced the forfeiture provision, recognized the disinherit clause triggered by diversion and concealment, appointed me successor trustee, and entered judgment supporting continuation of the asset freeze while related civil claims proceeded. 2 months later, a settlement and judgment package stripped Grant's advisory firm of management rights, required disgorgement of fees, and led to professional discipline proceedings. He was also hit with a restraining order after sending Marlene 3 late-night messages implying she should remember her age and stay out of things. Vanessa avoided jail on the financial counts because she cooperated late, repaid part of the diverted funds through forced liquidation, and testified against Grant on the document fraud issues. Karma is not always cinematic. Sometimes it looks like supervised access to a life you thought was yours, a rented townhouse, and former donors crossing the street before you reach them. Mercer House reopened 9 months later under the original trust mission. We kept the scholarship. We changed the board governance. We required dual signatures, quarterly independent review, and preservation of all digital records. Boring things. Beautiful things. Systems are what protect people after the speeches end. 1 year later, I was standing in the courtyard behind Mercer House at dusk while a group of scholarship apprentices argued over line mortar ratios like it mattered more than oxygen. It did to them. Their work aprons were chalked white. One of them, a 20-year-old named Louise, whose mother cleaned hotel rooms and whose hands were steadier than most surgeons, had just won a placement with a restoration firm in Charleston. The scholarship my father built had survived, not because family behaved well, because paper did. Marlene came out carrying a tray of iced tea like she still ran the place, which, unofficially, she did. "You're thinking too hard again," she said. "I'm trying to enjoy something." That is the same thing in your case. I laughed, really laughed. Nora arrived 20 minutes later in flat shoes and no patience, fresh from another hearing, and told me the condo Vanessa and Grant had nearly closed on was being sold under court supervision. The net proceeds would finish reimbursing the trust after fees. "Order has a satisfying texture," she said. I looked up at the windows my father once restored by hand. It does. Vanessa lives in Jacksonville now. We do not speak often. When we do, it is careful, measured. There is no dramatic reconciliation to offer you. She lost her beneficial interest. She lost her board seat, her social standing in Savannah, and the right to call herself steward of our father's legacy. Those losses were earned. I don't celebrate them. I respect them. Consequences are not cruelty. Grant left the state before the disciplinary proceedings concluded. Last I heard, his advisory business was dissolved. His professional network narrowed to men who still called obvious fraud aggressive structuring. And his engagement ring was in a pawn envelope somewhere outside Atlanta. Again, not cruelty. Gravity. As for me, I still have the scar. I still get tired around 4 in the afternoon if I skip lunch. I still keep original signatures in fireproof boxes and duplicate scans in 3 locations because trust, for me, is no longer a feeling. It's a protocol, and I am happy in a way I didn't know how to be before. Calmly, without witnesses. Some nights I lock Mercer House myself and stand in the entry hall after everyone leaves. I look at my father's portrait. I think about how long I spent mistaking endurance for love. How often families train one child to absorb the mess so everyone else can keep pretending the room is clean. That was the lesson I had to earn the expensive way. Boundaries are not betrayal. Documentation is not coldness. Self-worth is not proven by how much deception you can survive without complaining. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for the dead, for the living, and for yourself is refuse to let charm rewrite the record. So that's my question for you. Have you ever been the one in the family who noticed the missing page before anyone else did? And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, because sometimes justice doesn't arrive as a speech. Sometimes it arrives as a file name, a timestamp, and the moment a room finally has to tell the truth.